Why does the US spend so much on its military?
Let me show you how much the...
Okay. Before they even go into this, there is this concept, though, that like the United States military is more than just a military. It's the military for like a bunch of other countries. Like it provides protection for them. And it's like a broader like global stability force. That's like the devil's advocate argument. So just want to throw that out there. But we also do have a bunch of random old bureaucratic people who just want us to build new toys for the military and shit that doesn't even make sense in today's day and age. But
the United States spends on its military. Over here, you've got Russia, China, India, and other big military powers. And yet, if you combine them all into one, the US still spends more than the next 10 countries combined. But I'm interested in what happens inside of this circle. Like, what are we spending our money on?
There is a lot of our military spending is actually good. A lot of it's fucking dumb, but like dumb spending is the entire F-22, F-35, or not that, maybe not the F, maybe it was the F-20, or it was the F-35 program was horrible.
More than any other country on its military. Defense is pretty complicated and depends a lot on who you ask. So go to the sources, you can see how we got all these numbers and what 50 military bases, including the approximately 800 bases that are not in the United States, that are in other countries, which, by the way, are quite expensive to run because the US military has basically created a slice of America.
Most of the spending goes to Israel. Okay. I know that that's like, listen, guys, I know that it's like, yo, fuck Israel, fuck the US military. Our spending doesn't go to Israel. I'm sure some of it does, but trust me, we have a lot of other shit we like to spend our money on. Like most of, listen, what does most mean? Like, let's try to use numbers here. If most of our spending goes to Israel, you are telling me that $456 billion goes to Israel? Not most of, but you know what I mean? Actually, I'm pretty sure it's mostly that Israel just buys it. Yeah, actually, that's what someone else said. I think Israel just buys it from us.
Over here, you've got Russia, China, India, and other big military powers. And yet, if you combine them all into one, the US still spends.
Actually, I would love if someone, how much does the US military budget go into Israel versus how much does Israel just buy shit from us? I don't know. Like, you know, like that's like one of those questions where like people throw it around, but I don't actually know. And I'm not trying to like fucking I'm not trying to like defend one way or the other. I'm actually just curious. Like what, like, how does that work? Do we actually just give them money or like, do they buy stuff from us? Like, I don't know. Okay.
Some estimates, the Department of Defense is the largest employer in the world, though it depends on how you count it. The Pentagon also spends a lot of money on recruiting new talent, like the $28 million that they spent on hiring experts who work in artificial intelligence. Next, the military spends $140 billion on research and development. And a reminder, I know that these numbers are abstract and billion does.
Okay. U.S. aid to Israel in 4 charts. I love charts. How much U.S. aid does Israel receive? Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. aid. Military. Oh, this is cumulative over the years. Okay. I was like, well, there's no way 230 of our bill. Okay, but this is since 1946. Okay. Right now, we are providing Israel with $3.8 billion per year through 2028. But since October 7th, the United States has enacted legislation providing an additional $12.5 billion in military aid to Israel, which includes the $3.8 billion bill in March. So it's around like what, like 15, 16 billion. Oh. So the aid, we give them money to buy stuff from our military contractors. So most of the aid, approximately 3.3 billion a year, is provided as grants under the Foreign Military Financing Program, must be used to purchase U.S. military equipment and services. U.S. aid reportedly accounts for some 15% of Israel's defense budget. And that is why, chat, I only invest in Tesla, Chevron, and Lockheed Martin. This is why I invest in Lockheed. I'm kidding. I don't have Lockheed Martin. Well, maybe I do. I probably have Lockheed Martin stocks. I invest in index funds. Presumably one of the snapshots in the index fund is probably like, right? Like, chat, do you guys have a 401k? Do you have any random index funds that you own? Have you checked to see if any of them are part of the U.S. military industrial complex? I don't know. Fuck.
Doesn't mean anything to anyone, but like $140 billion, that's the entire economy of Morocco.
I would argue if 140 billion is in research, development, and testing, probably a decent amount of that's not bad. But like the U.S. military funds a lot of like good science, right?
Pentagon spends on R&D, thinking about the future, with the goal of maintaining technological superiority on the battlefield.
Yeah, I would say some of that's probably pretty well spent.
Meaning they're working on new tech. It's a huge part of what the Pentagon does. Now, a lot of this stuff is classified, but we do know that the Pentagon is spending money on stuff like AI, using AI to analyze drone footage to improve their target. 67 billion.
Taxpayers want to know how our tax dollars are getting.
What the graph here doesn't reveal is that most of this money is going to private corporations who get 466 billion of these dollars, about 54%. And once again, the US government tells us exactly which corporations they give all this money to. We pulled the last 19 years worth of data.
Oh God, here comes the Lockheed Martin.
On these private contractors. At the top of this list, you start to see the same names over and over. Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman.
Hey, chat, that's where I put my stock.
Lockheed Martin. These are the names at the top of this list.
I'm kidding.
Year after year. There used to be a lot of different defense contractors, but over the last 3 decades, they got gobbled up by these big 5. Transitioning, from the words of the Pentagon, from 51 to 5 aerospace and defense prime contractors. As a result, the DoD is increasingly reliant on a small number of contractors for critical defense capabilities, i.e. we've got kind of a monopoly issue on our hands. These 5 contractors own the space, and the Pentagon can't really go elsewhere if they need an F-35. There's only one shop in town that makes it. For this reason,
and that's why I'm kidding. The Lockheed Martin F-35 program is actually a great example of just horrible spending. It's like, why do we want an air superiority fighter again? Like, we can just shoot planes out of the sky without a fucking intercept plane.
The prices can get pretty out of control. Like, the Pentagon used to pay $25,000 for this Stinger missile, and now they pay nearly $500,000 for the same missile. The price went up more than 16 times in just a couple decades. A little more than inflation.
There's a history of defense contractors overcharging the U.S. government. They can overcharge. If they're the only company producing a certain widget, then there's no competition. And that's one of the problems with monopoly, is if there's not competition, it's easy to overcharge the buyer. In addition, the Inspector General of the Department of Defense has found routinely that there's overcharging through corruption and waste and fraud. And there have been lawsuits. For example, KBR is a contractor that's been used overseas, and they were found to overcharge in dining halls by 30 to 40%.
It's also why a Pentagon inspector realized that the Pentagon was paying Boeing, yes, that Boeing, $3,357 for.
This is why whenever you guys talk about boycotting, and I'm not saying the boycotts don't work or that you shouldn't boycott other things, but I am always curious if people who like aggressively boycott companies, if and when you fly, if you're like, was this made by was the plane I'm about to be on, is it made by Airbus or Boeing? Boeing, not buying this ticket. I'll pay more in my flight to make sure I fly on an Airbus than on a Boeing. Because Boeing is
for one ball bearing, a small little piece that
thanks to the Prime, by the way,
get for $15 in their own warehouse. $15.42 to be precise. When the Pentagon does get around to investigating these contractors, they sometimes find that they're taking huge profits, like 40 to 50% profit margins, giving them hundreds and millions of dollars above what they should be making in any kind of typical business environment. And what do they do with all these profits? Well, they pay their executives very well. But this list also tells us what they do. This is a list of how much money these defense contractors spend to influence our lawmakers into spending more money on the military so that these companies can make more money. You can see right here that Lockheed Martin is at the top of the list. So far this year, in this election cycle, Lockheed Martin has spent $2.7 million, split pretty evenly between Democrats and Republicans. This is a number that will continue to go up as we get closer to the election, and it is money spent to cozy up to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, contributing to their campaigns, bringing them out to show them how great their weapons are, doing whatever they can to make sure that the money keeps flowing to their companies. These companies also benefit from the infamous revolving door. The revolving door is not a literal door, it's a metaphorical door between the Pentagon and the defense corporations, which allows top military leaders like Jim Mattis to serve in the military for decades, retire as a general, and then join the board of General Dynamics, a defense contractor, only to pass through the proverbial door to become the Secretary of Defense under Trump. After which, he passes through the door again to go back onto the board of General Dynamics, bringing with him all of his insider knowledge and government contacts and influence. And no, this is
Dude, we should, you know what we should institute? Politicians in the United States. I actually agree with this concept that politicians in the United States should actually like, it should be like the Kingsguard in Game of Thrones. They should revoke any titles, lands, and all that bullshit. Like, to be a elected politician, you must revoke privately held stock. Like, you can't own stock. Like, I actually think our politicians should be like a separate like class of people. Like, they're not allowed to own private stock. They're not allowed to, after they retire, go and like work. Like, maybe we pay them more. Maybe like we, you know, like, I think that could be a cool solution. I would actually be down that if you become like a senator or a congressman or congresswoman, like your salary is like $1 million a year, something crazy. So it's a very like prestigious job. And then you get, after you're out of office, you get like some stipend for life, but you're not allowed to own equity. That'd be fucking cool.
This is not just Jim Mattis. This is a very
Yeah, whenever I see Nancy Pelosi invest in a company, I'm fucking there. I'm like, yo, Nancy, what are we going in on?
normal thing that people do here in DC. One analysis found that in 2022, top defense companies hired 672 employees directly out of the Pentagon to work as lobbyists, board members, and executives. Go check my sources if you want to read more about this. I mean, yes, the revolving door is metaphorical, but it's also pretty physical and literal. I drive on this freeway all the time, and I'm always struck at how close all of this is. Over here is the Pentagon, and over here are all the defense contractors in an area of town literally called Pentagon City.
If there's someone working in government who is deciding on contracts and they have a conversation with someone who's going to receive that contract, the person in the firm can promise a good high-paying job after that government official is out of government. And so the government official then has an incentive to give a generous contract to the contractor because they know they're getting this kind of quid pro quo. They're going to get a high-paying job after they leave government.
Did you guys know prior to streaming and joining PlayStation, I was going to join, I was either going to be working for... So the three groups I was talking to for jobs, I was going to be doing like strategy work for either the CIA, the IDA, which is the Institute for Defense Analysis, or I was going to join some sub branch of the Pentagon. I was going to be doing like military analysis and strategy. Those are like the three ones I was looking at.
And to add insult to injury,
we're not there now.
Some of the lawmakers who approve the Pentagon's budget own stocks in the defense contracting companies. Like, the lawmakers get richer if we spend more money on defense. No. Why do we do this? Like, this is like classic, basic, simple. Like, no, conflict of interest. We should not do this. This is not a thing we should do. But actually owning stocks in these companies is not the biggest way, I think, that our lawmakers are influenced by defense contractors. There's something more subtle going on here that I think is actually the best explanation. And it has to do with this excellent map. This map was assembled by an Air Force veteran and analyst named Christian Sorensen. This map makes it easy to see how contractors intentionally allocate their operations all across the country, spanning dozens of states and political districts. Building all of this stuff means jobs, which people like. So lawmakers are incentivized to keep these contractors making stuff in their district, to provide jobs for their people so they can keep getting elected. It's honestly brilliant. It's smart. This is political engineering. You can see it very clearly with lawmakers like Roger Wicker, a senator from the state of Mississippi. Senator Wicker is a member of the U.S. Senate.
We should get rid of the Electoral College. I'd be down to just popular vote in the president, I'll be honest.
Committee on Armed Services, which plays a huge role in giving taxpayer money.
Because then like random fucking states like, I don't know, Ohio and Pennsylvania and all these fucking swing states, like then we can stop like fucking glazing and dick riding them and we can, you know, have people campaign appropriately across the country.
To the Pentagon, which in turn feeds the bottom line of contractors. Wicker loves the military. You often hear him advocating that we should spend way more on the military.
We need, in the United States, to spend more on defense. It's a necessity.
He writes op-eds in the New York Times calling for more shipbuilding. And when you look at his state, you realize, of course he does. The largest employer in Mississippi is this naval shipyard run by a defense contractor named Huntington Ingalls. which means more jobs and economic stimulus for Wicker's people in his state, which means a better likelihood of being reelected. Now, these defense contractors know that Senator Wicker is an important part of their bottom line, so they contribute huge amounts of money to his campaign to make sure he gets reelected. It's this virtuous cycle between Senator Wicker and the defense contractors that results in us spending more money on things that maybe we don't need to. Senator Wicker's job is to represent the American people. He sits on a committee that is supposed to be looking at our national security as a whole. And yet, thanks to the strategy of these for-profit defense contractors, this lawmaker has way too much incentive to advocate for more military spending, which is exactly what he does. My issue here is less with Senator Wicker or Congressman Mike Rogers, who has the same thing, sits on a committee, gives a bunch of money to the Pentagon, has a state where billions of dollars of defense contract money comes into.
Nothing but the tide, brother. Woo!
Takes tons of money from defense contractors for his campaign, gets reelected, continues to approve more money for the Pentagon, etc. My issue is with the system that allows this to happen, that allows the money from our military spending to be used to influence our lawmakers into more military spending. It's so clearly a conflict of interest. And it is this system that has created an environment where there is very little political pushback to the endless ratcheting up of our military budget.
No congressperson wants to be the person who loses jobs in their district. Nobody wants to be the one known as shutting down a plant and people becoming unemployed. And so Lockheed can say, we have to have increased funding of this contract or you will lose jobs. And so that idea that jobs are essential, the Department of Defense spending is essential, really gives the contractor political power.
I will admit it is a more complicated issue. And I'm glad they did this video, because like this is one of those things where like I feel like sometimes our basic response is, oh my God, the US spends so much money on the military. That's so fucking dumb. They should just cut that budget. It's like, well, what happens if we cut that budget? Like, who does that impact, right? Not saying we shouldn't cut the budget, but I'm saying it's like, it's good to like think about all of the facets of a given topic or issue, you know?
Let me make one point clear, which is that this isn't all corporate lobbying that contributes to the US spending so much on the military. That would be too lazy of an explanation. We live in a world where there's a well-documented paradox that explains that strong militaries are actually the key ingredient to avoiding conflict, in deterring an enemy from attacking.
This is true.
Keeping a balance between big militaries so that no one attacks. Maybe
there is there are theories in political science, and this is going to get me in a lot of trouble on Twitter and elsewhere, but it's like something people need to consider. I have to think of my words very carefully here. I'm going to get in trouble for this, chat. Fuck, how do I say this? Oh, shit. 07's in the chat for this take. By the way, it's not a take. It's not that I believe this. It's almost like I need to see the counterfactual. Like I need to see the world in which this doesn't exist. But in studying political science, even a lot of the more like progressive or liberal political scientists, when discussing the dynamics of the New World Order post World War II, the strength, like the overwhelming strength and presence of the United States military like we technically are in the safest age. I know that's already a controversial take, but that is true. We are in the safest age when it comes to military conflict. And the question is, now, did it have to be the United States that had that overwhelming military? Not necessarily. It could have been any single power rising out of World War II that had an overwhelming military presence. Right. So when I say it's the safest age, and you say for us, when I say for us, I mean like for humankind. When it comes to military conflict, we are in the safest few decades in all of human history. It's not across all of humankind, right? So, you know, like one of the and that's not to be like, oh my God, like the U.S. incursion into Vietnam or the U.S. incursion into this state. Like, it's not to justify any of that or the spreading of U.S. power, but it is. There's like a broader question of like, what does a safer world look like? And if the United States after World War II had just pulled here's maybe like a counterfactual. What if the United States after World War II just pulled out of like just went pure isolationist and just let the world be as it will, what would have and just didn't spend money and didn't build out our military anymore, like what would have happened? I don't know. Would that have been a better world? I don't know. Maybe not. Right, like I mean, would the Soviets have just like full on engaged in World War? Like, would they have started a full on World War III instead of the Cold War? Would we have had a World War III? Right. Say it in Fortnite terms. No one cancels Fortnite. Okay. What if because US Quickscoper had full shields and a gold sniper rifle and a gold rocket launcher and had the best loot in Tomato Town? What if that made it so that Tomato Town was actually safer because no one wanted to crank 90s against US Quickscoper? And that if US Quickscoper did not have all of the best loot, it would have encouraged all the other residents of Tomato Town to fight with each other more often. How is that?
Someday we won't need militaries, even close to the size that we have today. But it appears that in today's world, we still do need big militaries with credible threats to avoid the age-old human curse of war. And yet on the other side of that paradox is the fact that if you grow your military, you force your adversary to do the same, to keep pace with you. The US and the Soviet Union did that for decades during the Cold War, each ratcheting up their military until suddenly both sides had over 10,000 nuclear warheads.
Yeah, so you get into the issue of arms races, but now we're in like a weird state where it's like, no one in the world really needs to arms race the US. Like, there's no real good incentive to do it. Like, you need to be kind of strong enough, but like, so if anything, it's like, it's more valuable to develop your technologies or your capabilities in other ways or wage economic war, which is what China has been doing, right? Obviously, they're still developing their military, but they're not going like full on Cold War spending, right? So
that is madness. It diverges from the rational, and yet it's the logical result when we decide that the main solution to beating our rivals is to just make more weapons.
As the US spends more, Russia, China, other countries are spending more. If you look at the discretionary budget, about 50% of that goes to the Department of Defense, and only 1 or 2% of that goes to the Department of State. You can see where our priorities are. A show of force is really the first foreign policy of the US.
For this one, the explanation is easy. Diplomacy is hard and complicated and long. It doesn't make leaders feel as powerful and secure as having a big military does. And no one's getting rich off diplomacy. And yet diplomacy, international law and organizations, treaties, cooperation, that is how we solve our differences.
The problem with this statement, and like, this is how I think a political scientist would respond to this statement. A philosopher, let me put it this way. A philosopher would agree with you. A psychologist would agree with you. A political scientist would disagree, because empirically we can look at how well treaties and international organizations and any form of cooperation between nation states has failed horribly, and literally sometimes then leads to the problematic conflicts in the future, right? Like, it's all well and good to say we should go the route of diplomacy and like that's the right thing to do, but like a political scientist would be like, hey, empirically that has not worked, so you need to like come up with you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying it's great the US has a giant army and all that. Obviously, we should spend less on our military, but it is definitely a nuanced and complicated issue. This is one of the, love that Treaty of Versailles. Like, this is one of those issues where like, I feel like oftentimes it's very easy to look at this issue and be like, the United States spends way too much on their military. We should not spend money on our military. And like leave it at that, as opposed to doing the deep dive like they did in this video and talking about how it might affect, all these plants and workers in these various states and the economy and how it affects this, how it might affect the world order. Like, there's like a lot of just interesting nuance to it,
That is how we have learned to live peacefully on this globe. The fact is, no one ever achieved sustainable peace by spending more on their military. And finally, we have to remember that while we pour so much into our military, that is money that can't be spent elsewhere.
If we increase defense spending, that necessarily has to mean something else decreases. Bigger piece of the pie for defense, smaller piece of the pie for other things. And those other things might be healthcare, education, climate change, and so on. And then we can also think of this notion of security. What actually makes us secure? Does spending more on defense make us more secure? If you look at other sources of security, having good roads and bridges, having safe drinking water, these are all things that Americans need investment in to be safe, to be healthy. So we're economically secure. People have jobs that they can go to, funding for college. Those are all.
Well, I see like this I fundamentally agree with. I look at also the state of our military now, and it's also just what the things we invest in, right? If you were to ask me, if you were to make me in charge of the policies, like make me president, I would 100% look at ways to reinvest what we're investing in the military into U.S. infrastructure that makes the country more stable and secure from like a people's perspective, that also then can provide jobs and bolster the economy in a way that the defense spending was doing. That's just like the general strategy I would employ. What that tactically looks like, hey, someone who actually knows what the fuck that is can go and do that.
All sources of security as well. So it's not just military security we need to think of when we think of the federal budget.
I deeply respect the men and women who work and serve the country in the military. But I think that our laws and norms around how much money we give to the military prevents us from assessing this situation clearly. The system we have incentivizes the wrong priorities. Priorities that have a lot more to do with profit margins of companies and the electability of lawmakers. All of this setting us on a path of infinite escalation that risks ending in disaster.